The summer of 1943 marked a moment when the fate of nations balanced on a knife's edge. Across the windswept plains of Russia, the armies of Hitler and Stalin prepared for a confrontation unlike anything the world had ever seen. More than 2 million men, 6,000 tanks, and thousands of aircraft gathered around a single stretch of land, Kursk. For Adolf Hitler, this battle, codenamed Operation Citadel, was meant to erase the humiliation of Stalingrad and prove that German might was still unbreakable. For Joseph Stalin, it was a test of survival, an opportunity to bleed the invader and turn the tide once and for all. What unfolded was no ordinary clash of armies. It was the largest tank battle in history, a storm of steel and fire that would mark the end of Germany's ambitions in the East, and the beginning of the Soviet Union's unstoppable march to Berlin. The German High Command knew that after the devastating defeat at Stalingrad, a bold victory was essential to restore morale and reassert control on the Eastern Front. Hitler turned his eyes toward the Kursk salient, a bulge in Soviet lines that stretched deep into German-held territory. His plan, Operation Citadel, called for a massive pincer movement from north and south, encircling Soviet armies trapped inside. The key to success would be speed, precision, and the crushing power of Germany's newest weapons, the Panther and Tiger tanks. Yet as Hitler delayed the offensive to amass more of these machines, time became the enemy. Every week of postponement allowed the Red Army to build deeper defenses, lay thousands of mines, and prepare for the storm to come. The Germans believed technology and experience would carry the day. But what they did not anticipate was that the Soviets already knew of their plans and were preparing the battlefield in ways that would tilt the odds against them. Kursk was not just another offensive, it was Germany's gamble for the East, and failure here would be more than a lost battle. It would mean the loss of strategic initiative, perhaps forever. For Stalin and his generals, Kursk represented both danger and opportunity. Intelligence reports and intercepted communications revealed that the Germans were concentrating enormous forces around the salient. Rather than retreat, the Soviets chose to stand their ground and absorb the blow. Under the direction of Marshal Georgy Zhukov, a vast defensive system was constructed. Layer upon layer of trenches, bunkers and strongpoints stretched for hundreds of miles. Entire villages were transformed into fortresses. Most crucial of all were the minefields. Nearly 500,000 mines were laid, forming deadly belts designed to slow the German armored advance and funnel it into kill zones. Behind these defenses, Soviet artillery and reserves waited, ready to unleash destruction once the Germans were bogged down. The Red Army had learned from the disasters of 1941 and 1942. No longer would they be caught unprepared or swept aside by blitzkrieg tactics. Kursk would be fought on Soviet terms. The waiting was tense, but confidence grew. This was not just a defensive stand, it was a trap. And when the Germans came, the Red Army intended to break their teeth against the steel wall they had so carefully built. On July 5, 1943, the German offensive finally began. At dawn, the roar of artillery and the thunder of advancing tanks signaled the start of Operation Citadel. From the north, Field Marshal Model's 9th Army pressed down toward Kursk. From the south, General Hoth's 4th Panzer Army surged forward with some of Germany's most powerful armored divisions. The Tigers and Panthers led the charge, their thick armor shrugging off many Soviet shells. Yet progress was agonizingly slow. Minefields exploded beneath tracks, knocking out vehicles before they could even reach the front. Engineers worked frantically under fire to clear paths, while Soviet artillery poured destruction onto the advancing columns. The Soviets responded with counterattacks, sometimes throwing entire tank brigades against the German spearheads in desperate clashes. The battlefields quickly turned into hellscapes of smoke, fire, and twisted steel. Despite heavy losses, the Germans pressed forward. By July 10th, they had carved shallow wedges into Soviet lines, but their momentum was faltering. Each mile gained came at a terrible cost. The stage was set for the climactic clash that would define Kursk, the titanic confrontation at Prokhorovka. On July 12th, near the small town of Prokhorovka, the largest tank battle in history erupted. The The German 2nd SS Panzer Corps advanced, confident in their superior armor. Awaiting them were the Soviet 5th Guards tank army, ordered to strike with full force and prevent a breakthrough. The result was chaos on an unimaginable scale. Over 1,200 tanks and self-propelled guns collided across the fields. The fighting was so close that maneuvering was almost impossible, massive machines ramming, colliding and firing point-blank at one another. Dust and smoke filled the air, turning daylight into a haze of confusion. The Soviet T-34s, faster and more maneuverable, swarmed the heavier German Tigers, often sacrificing themselves to disable the enemy at close range. Casualties on both sides were staggering, but while the Germans inflicted heavy losses, they could not achieve the breakthrough they needed. By nightfall, the Soviet lines held. Prokhorovka became a symbol of Soviet resilience and marked the moment when the German offensive finally broke against the wall of Soviet resistance. Kursk's outcome was sealed, not by a single clash, but by the relentless pressure that ground down the Wehrmacht's last great gamble in the east. With the German attack blunted, Stalin and his generals seized the initiative. Within days, the Red Army launched massive counter-offensives from the north and south. The Germans, exhausted and depleted from their failed push, were forced onto the defensive. Soviet forces surged forward, liberating the cities of Orel, Belgorod, and Kharkov in rapid succession. The once feared German panzers were now in retreat, struggling to hold ground as waves of Soviet armor and infantry pressed relentlessly forward. The Luftwaffe, stretched thin and outnumbered, could no longer dominate the skies as it had in earlier campaigns. Meanwhile, Soviet industry continued to pour out T-34s, artillery, and aircraft in overwhelming numbers. The momentum had shifted irreversibly. Kursk was not merely a defensive victory. It marked the beginning of a relentless Soviet advance that would carry through Ukraine, into Poland, and ultimately to Berlin itself. For the German army, Kursk was the last great offensive on the Eastern Front. For the Soviets, it was the dawn of strategic supremacy. The Red Army had learned, adapted, and endured, and now it was their turn to push the enemy back mile by mile until the Reich lay in ruins. The Battle of Kursk stands as one of the decisive turning points of World War II. It ended forever the myth of German invincibility in the East. Despite deploying their most advanced tanks, their best divisions, and immense firepower, the Wehrmacht had failed to break through. For the Soviets, it was a vindication of sacrifice, strategy, and resilience. The scale of the battle left scars across the Russian landscape. Fields once green became graveyards of twisted steel. Villages were reduced to ashes. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers on both sides were killed, wounded, or missing. Yet out of this devastation emerged a clear truth. The Red Army had seized the initiative and would not let it go. After Kursk, the Germans would fight only to delay the inevitable. From the plains of Russia to the streets of Berlin, the course of the war was now set. Kursk was more than just a clash of armies. It was the battle that shattered Germany's offensive power, ensured Soviet ascendancy, and changed the balance of World War II. It remains, to this day, a symbol of endurance, sacrifice, and the turning tide that reshaped the fate of Europe.